A long time ago, a tall handsome man abandoned his woman on the altar to marry another woman his family didn't know. His name was Patrick. His story shocked the entire community. Patrick was the kind of man every woman prayed for: successful, well-spoken, and God-fearing. He owned a chain of logistics companies in Abuja. His business kept his name on everyone's lips. Patrick's life was a perfect facade. Mrs. Elizabeth loved her son dearly and wanted the best for him. She carefully chose Jessica, a sweet and gentle girl, for him to marry. Patrick was always kind and attentive to Jessica, showing genuine affection. He enjoyed picking her up from church and proudly introducing her to his friends. The wedding preparations began in earnest. After their proposal, Mrs. Elizabeth could not hold back her excitement. She printed over 900 cards and invited people of timber and caliber who she knew from her time in politics. Mrs. Elizabeth was once a commissioner in the state. Her influence stretched across the country, and her name still opened doors in high places. Patrick's wedding to Jessica was a grand affair with guests from Lagos, South Africa, and the USA. The event was highly publicized and awaited by many, but in a shocking twist, Patrick secretly married another woman, and the second wedding happened on the same day as his planned wedding. No one knew about the other woman, not even Jessica. Patrick beamed with joy as he exchanged vows with his secret bride. Mrs. Elizabeth and guests tried to calm Jessica, who was heartbroken. Everyone wondered what had happened to Patrick, who was nowhere to be found. Hours later, Patrick appeared with a shocking announcement. "I'm married," he said, standing tall and showing no regret. His words left everyone speechless and stunned. The news was like a thunderbolt to all the guests. As his mom passed out on the ground, it took some women and bottles of water to bring her back to life. When her eyes opened, and she saw her son standing proudly with another woman, she wailed like a mother at the funeral. "You married who, Patrick? You disgraced me. You destroyed everything I built. I invited the current governor, ministers, and commissioners. What will I tell them now?" But Patrick remained unmoved. "I did what I needed to do, Mum. I followed my heart." He said to his mum, "I don't care. You don't have a heart. You left Jessica like a widow, standing alone on the altar, and now you came with this book face to bring me shame." Everyone turned to stare at Sophia as they held their laughter in. Sophia was too quiet. Her eyes, dark and steady, knowing, gave nothing away. But her face betrayed all. Everything was written across her face like headlines on the front page of a newspaper. And from that day on, Patrick's mum never called her by her name. She simply called her Bookface. And Sophia did not react. She moved into Patrick's penthouse like a queen returning to her throne. She redecorated the place in a week, fired his driver and cook, hired her own driver, changed the staff uniforms, installed security cameras, and gave instructions that even Patrick did not know about. Mrs. Elizabeth tried to visit their home uninvited, but Sophia met her at the gate. "You can't enter," she said to Patrick's mum, who stood there stunned, realizing that her son's wife was now prohibiting her from entering her own son's house. "Excuse me," Mrs. Elizabeth blinked in disbelief as she tried to force her way in, but Sophia shut the door to her face, leaving her speechless. Mrs. Elizabeth couldn't believe her eyes. She stormed into her car, angry, and she called her son Patrick to inform him of all that just transpired. But Patrick told her to go home, that he would visit her later that evening when he returned. Mrs. Elizabeth sat in her car, her hands trembling with fury. The phone call had ended, but the insults lingered in her ears like a bitter taste. "Go home, Mum." That was all her beloved son had to say. No anger, no apology, no support. It was as if she had become a stranger overnight, replaced by a lady who she didn't even know where she came from. Mrs. Elizabeth clenched her fist and ordered her driver to take her straight to her prophetess, who informed her that her son had been bewitched by a sea spirit. "She is not human," she said. Revealing that they had to go on a 90-day fasting and prayer immediately, or else Mrs. Elizabeth would lose her only son completely to the sea spirit. Mrs. Elizabeth, at that moment now understood why no one knew who Sophia was or where she came from. The private investigator she hired could not find anything on her. No family, no trace, nothing that could help them discover who she truly was. Mrs. Elizabeth couldn't understand what her son had gotten himself into. She returned home and waited for her son Patrick to visit. Hours later, Patrick showed up at his mom's mansion alone, exhausted from the day's work. Before he could even sit down, Mrs. Elizabeth began to yell out at him angrily, "So this is it? After everything I've done for you, I raised you alone, sent you to New York, built your first office. Now I am no longer welcome in your house?" "Mum, it's not like that," Patrick said. "Then how is it?" she snapped. "That thing, that bookface, stood at your door like the Queen of England and told me that I could not enter my own son's house." "Who gave her the right to even stand before me?" she asked her son Patrick, who smiled and told her not to call his woman that name again. "Her name is Sophia, and she is my lovely wife, the woman I chose to marry," Patrick said to his mum, who informed him that his wife was a witch. "Who is she, Patrick? And why did you decide to marry her without my knowledge?" she asked Patrick, who told her that she had nothing to worry about. "I have nothing to worry about. You see, after that witch has bewitched you, that book-face woman bewitched you and locked you in a bottle, not knowing the son of who you are. I will teach her that nobody born under the sun can come close to my family," she said to Patrick, who stood there confused as he watched his mum walk away in anger. Patrick was so tired. He arrived home a few hours later to meet his wife Sophia, who had prepared his favorite meal. As they sat there conversing about how their day went, the gatekeeper rushed to inform them that Mrs. Elizabeth was at the gate. "What does she want again?" Patrick grumbled as he told the gatekeeper to let her in. But the gatekeeper informed him that she did not want to come in. "Then what's she doing here?" Patrick asked shockingly as he stood up from his chair and walked to his gate. To his surprise, Patrick caught sight of his mother sprinkling holy water at his gate. She was in deep prayers, casting and binding his wife Sophia, who stood there stoned to see the drama unfolding. My boy did not hold back. She called out Sophia's name repeatedly as she even sprinkled some water on her, binding her and commanding her to leave her son alone. Patrick could not stand the humiliation. He told his gatekeeper to lock the gate as he went into the house with his wife, who stood there in disbelief. The drops of holy water clinging to her skin like tiny insults. "I'm sorry," he said, pacing. "I'll talk to her again. I swear this has gone too far." But Sophia did not speak. She simply walked to the sink, washed her hands quietly, and returned to her seat. Her eyes, once sharp with confidence, were now void of emotion, unreadable, blank, like a book waiting for a painful story to be written. The lady he was supposed to marry fell into deep depression. She paid Mrs. Elizabeth a visit, crying and lamenting about how Patrick had destroyed her life. Mrs. Elizabeth could not bear to see her cry. She assured Jessica that her son Patrick would still marry her. "That useless woman he claims to have married will soon leave his house, giving way for you to take your rightful position," she assured Jessica, who left the house hours later, excited that Patrick would one day come back to marry her. Meanwhile, Jessica was over the moon, basking in the joy of finally marrying Patrick. Patrick was in his office, angry. He hadn't slept properly in weeks. Not because of work, not because of Sophia, but because his mother had turned his house into a prayer house every day for the past 36 days. At midnight, Mrs. Elizabeth appeared at the gate, holding a bottle of holy water. As she began to pray, "Every marine spirit at work in this house, catch fire," she would scream, her voice echoing through the entire house. Patrick's neighbors began peeking through their windows, wondering why his mother was making noise in the neighborhood. Sophia was so livid. She would wake up groggy, with eye bags the size of carry-on luggage under her eyes, and stare at Patrick like she was plotting a quiet murder. "Your mom has turned me into a prayer point," she whispered one morning. "I heard her praying in tongues about me last night, begging God to separate me from you," she said to Patrick, who promised to do something about it days later. Jessica decided to pay Sophia a visit. She wore the engagement ring that Patrick had given to her months before he abandoned her at the altar. The moment Sophia opened the door, she could not believe who she was seeing. "Can I help you?" she said to the woman who placed her hand on her chest to show the engagement ring on her finger. "Pardon my manners. I'm Jessica, Patrick's fiancée," she said to Sophia, who asked what she was doing in their house. "You must have a death wish," Jessica said to Sophia, who stood there calm as she watched her boil in anger. "You took what's mine with your witchcraft, and I'm here to tell you that your plans have failed. Soon I'll take what rightfully belongs to me," she threatened Sophia, who stood there smiling as she watched Jessica vent. "You bookface, what's so funny?" she asked Sophia, who landed her a very hot slap. Jessica raised her hand to retaliate when Sophia beat her up like a small child. Jessica could not believe her eyes. She stood there in pain as Patrick rushed down the stairs to meet her at his door. "What are you doing here?" Patrick asked as he warned her never to come to his house again. "Get out," he said angrily to her, who paused as she watched Patrick bang the door on her face. Jessica stood there in complete shock, clutching her burning cheeks like a wounded lioness. She staggered back slowly, heels wobbling, makeup smudged, her once flawless wig now tilted slightly. The security guard tried not to laugh. Even the dog backed in a way that sounded like mockery. Glanced back at the house, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Is it me that this useless girl slapped?" she asked herself as she walked out of the house. Inside the house, however, Patrick stood in the middle of the living room, heaving in anger. He turned to Sophia, who stood there calm like one who could not hurt a fly. "Did you really have to slap her?" Patrick asked his wife Sophia, who smiled and looked up at him. "She called me bookface, and I could not help but give her a new headline." Patrick did not know when he burst out in laughter. It was the first time in weeks that he truly laughed, the kind that bubbles from his belly, uncontrollable and loud, as if Sophia had finally pressed the pressure valve inside of him. He clutched his stomach, still chuckling, as he fell back onto the couch, eyes watery from relief and laughter. Sophia did not laugh. She simply returned to the dining table, crossed her legs like a queen in control of her empire, and took a sip from her wine glass. "Next time," she said calmly, "tell your ex-fiancé that this bookface now prints obituaries too." Patrick let out another laughter, shaking his head. "God, you are insane, Sophia," he said as Sophia sat there and sipped her wine. Meanwhile, at Mrs. Elizabeth's house, Jessica sat in her living room, crying, and she told Mrs. Elizabeth all that had happened. "I went there, Mama. I went to fight for what belongs to me. And that witch, that bookface, slapped me and beat me like a child." Mrs. Elizabeth could not believe her ears. "She slapped you?" she asked as she paced the room, thinking of what to do with Sophia, the woman who not only snuck into her son's life but also stopped her from ever visiting his home. Mrs. Elizabeth immediately called her prophetess, who informed her that they had to meet immediately for special prayers. Mrs. Elizabeth was about to head out when she heard her doorbell ring. She opened the door and found a delivery man standing there. "From who?" Mrs. Elizabeth asked, and the man shrugged and handed her the package. On it was a writing that stated, "From the one who knows the truth." Mrs. Elizabeth collected the package and walked into her house slowly. She opened up the package and saw a flash drive. Mrs. Elizabeth could not understand what was happening. She had a laptop but did not know how to use it. So she pleaded with Jessica to help her plug in the flash drive into the port, and she saw a file that appeared on the screen. "Play me if you dare to know why." Mrs. Elizabeth took a seat as she told Jessica to wait for her in the living room. She clicked on the video and began to watch. It was a video of a man and a woman walking into a hotel. Mrs. Elizabeth could not make out their faces, so she decided to keep watching, trying to understand what the video was all about. She saw them hugging as they made their way to the hotel room. Mrs. Elizabeth could not help but think, "Is this not Sophia?" she thought to herself as she curiously watched the video, trying to see the face of the woman who was now walking hand in hand with the strange man. Minutes later, the video showed the faces of the people, and Mrs. Elizabeth's eyes froze in complete shock. It was Jessica and the son of her prophetess in a hotel room, kissing. Jessica was in bed with him as they laughed, joked, and referred to her son Patrick as a fool. Mama watched as they said things about her son that made her sick to her stomach. Once I marry Patrick, I'll poison him and move all his assets to my name. Then I'll act as a poor widow for 1 year and mourn the idiot, not raise any suspicion with his foolish mother. That woman gets on my last nerve. It's obvious she doesn't love her son, forcing him to marry a woman like me. A homewrecker, she said as the prophetess's son laughed and replied, "You know Mrs. Elizabeth is so foolish. She listens to whatever the prophetess tells her. So she plans to give her the oil to make Patrick fall deeply in love with you." The prophetess's son added as they both laughed and made fun of Mrs. Elizabeth as well as her son Patrick. Mrs. Elizabeth could not believe her ears. Jessica, the girl who she almost forced on her son, had not only been sleeping with the prophetess's son but had also plotted to murder her only child Patrick, the very child she carried for 9 months, labored to raise alone, and built a life around. Her legs buckled as she staggered back, feeling the room spin around her. For the first time in over 20 years, Mrs. Elizabeth wept like a child. Tears rolled down her cheeks, hot, bitter tears. And she remembered all that she put her son through because of Jessica. She remembered standing at the gate of her son's house, screaming prayers that now mocked her ignorance. She had almost delivered her son to death with her own hands. She closed the laptop, her hands trembling as she wiped her tears. Mrs. Elizabeth walked up to the living room and met Jessica, who was oblivious of what had just been revealed. She looked up with her usual entitled smile, dabbing her fake tears with a silk handkerchief. "Mama, what did the video say? Was it proof against that witch? I'm sure it's something we can use to get her out of Patrick's house." Before she could finish speaking, Mrs. Elizabeth landed her a very hot slap. The same place that Sophia had slapped her earlier, her head spun sideways, her cheek burning as her eyes opened wide in shock. "Mama, what did I do?" she asked Mrs. Elizabeth, who began to scream out angrily. "You evil, you lying, poisonous, God-forsaken snake. You sat in my house, crying like a widow, when all along you are the one holding the gun to kill my son." Jessica blinked, confused. "Mama, I don't understand what you're talking about." "Oh, don't even try it," Mrs. Elizabeth thundered. "You and that devilish son of the prophetess planned to kill Patrick and inherit his wealth. You mocked me in that hotel room. Called me foolish. Me, Mrs. Elizabeth. You thought you could deceive me forever." The flash drive showed everything. Stood up, panicking. "Mama, wait. Let me explain." "Explain what?" "That you planned to poison my son? That you called me a fool? That you slept with another man while parading yourself as a virgin? You ungrateful goat." "Mama, please. Please. It was a mistake. I love your son. I have changed. Get out of my house now." Mrs. Elizabeth yelled out at the top of her voice as Jessica froze. "I said, get out. You're lucky I didn't drag you to the police. I don't want to ever see you near my son again. If I see you near my gate, if I ever hear your name again, I swear by the grave of my ancestors I will kill you with my bare hands." Jessica turned and ran, stumbling over her own legs as she fled from the mansion. Mrs. Elizabeth watched her disappear through the gate as she collapsed on her knees, crying. Not for Jessica, not for the shame. She wept for her son Patrick, the one she had wronged, the one she now had to face and beg. That evening, Mrs. Elizabeth showed up at Patrick's house, barefoot, with no driver or security in sight. Sophia opened the door and froze when she saw her. Mrs. Elizabeth fell to her knees. "Please forgive me," she cried. "Forgive me for all the things I did to you, for all the names I called you, for all the shame I brought to your doorstep," she said to Sophia, who stood there stoned as Larry walked in on his mother kneeling and begging for forgiveness. "Mum, what happened?" Patrick asked his mother, who handed the flash drive to him as her hands trembled. "Everything is all in here," she said. The prophetess, the plan to kill you, my shame, my foolishness." Patrick took the flash drive from her and smiled. "I sent it, Mum," he said, revealing that he knew all along. His mother looked at him stunned. "Was that why you did not want to marry her?" she asked Patrick, who told her to sit as they began to tell her the whole story. What had happened was that Patrick met Sophia so many years ago. She was his first love, and Patrick was so shocked to see her again after so many years. Sophia lost her entire family in a robbery. The armed men shot her entire family dead in their home on that fateful night. She thought it was a normal robbery, not knowing that someone was out to wipe out her entire family. One midnight, after they had killed her entire family, they returned and set her family house on fire, knowing that she was inside. However, Sophia knocked out from one of the windows and escaped into the night. She traveled to a different city and changed her name to Sophia, erasing everything about her past. For years, she lived in hiding, working small jobs, learning to survive, as she made up her mind to find out who exactly was behind the death of her entire family. It was during that journey that she stumbled upon something horrifying, a document that her father kept in his secret storage in town. Sophia remembered her father telling her about a storage box in town where he kept valuable documents. So she decided to trace the box one evening and saw some documents that raised her suspicion. Her father was a state auditor who had uncovered large-scale fraud tied to the prophetess and her son. Before he could blow the whistle, his entire family was eliminated, except Sophia, who managed to escape. She changed her name and waited for years to make them believe that she died in the fire. Little did they know that Sophia was the daughter of the auditor who they eliminated with his family. On one of the days when Sophia was trailing the prophet's son, she saw him with a woman who she did not think much of at first, until she overheard them talking about their next target, Patrick. The name rang a bell, and Sophia decided to trail the woman who led her straight to Patrick's house. This was months before their wedding, and Sophia did everything possible to save Patrick's life. She told him of their plans and warned him to be careful of the woman that he planned to marry, as well as the prophetess and her son. And Patrick, not wanting to believe what she was seeing, decided to investigate for himself and realized that Sophia was telling the truth. He apologized for not believing her at first. And the more they spent time together, the more Patrick began to develop genuine feelings for Sophia, whose real name was Gift Benjamin. Patrick did nothing to make Jessica suspect that he knew what she was up to. He led her on and abandoned her at the altar, believing that it was the best revenge for a woman who planned to kill him. Mrs. Elizabeth sat in stunned silence, unable to speak, as her son finally unveiled the entire truth to her. Sophia, the same woman who she mocked and humiliated, had been the one protecting her son all along. Mrs. Elizabeth felt so stupid at that moment for calling her paper face. She now understood why Sophia changed the staff and workers immediately she moved into Patrick's house. No one knew that she was protecting Patrick from potential harm. Mrs. Elizabeth apologized to her again, promising to make the prophetess and her son pay for all the evil that they had ever done. She called the police, who arrested them all before they could skip town. She finally embraced Sophia as her son's wife and showered her with so much love and attention. The lesson learned is that the person we mock or reject may be the one sent to save us. Pride, assumptions, and judgments can blind even the wisest of hearts to truth. Mrs. Elizabeth wrongly judged Sophia by her appearance, calling her book face. She didn't see the strength and worth behind Sophia's face. But in the end, Sophia's so-called paper face exposed a deadly conspiracy. It was Sophia who saved Mrs. Elizabeth's son from destruction and harm. This story shows us the danger of judging others based on looks. We should look beyond appearances and not be quick to dismiss others. The person you mock or underestimate today may be your savior tomorrow. Before you judge, take a closer look, because the face you mock may be the one that saves your life. Thank you so much for watching. Please don't forget to give us a like, comment and subscribe to our channel for more interesting stories.